What do you get when you combine silky smooth combat with rhythmic adaptive boss design? Bloodborne. Wait, no, not that one. Dark Souls. No, hold on. Sekiro. Shadows Die Twice. I'm starting to think From Software might be good at their job. Besides being my favorite developer, FromSoft, in my humble opinion, is responsible for creating the greatest combat system ever. It's been said before, but Sekiro is more of a rhythm game than anything else, its combat being comparable to a violent, methodical dance. I get chills thinking about Sekiro's boss fights, trading musical blows with the owl, parrying Genichiro's string of electrifying attacks, struggling to keep up with Ishin's breakneck tempo, and doing whatever the hell this is. It's a game that takes an immense amount of focus and practice, which, at this point, is incredibly on brand for FromSoft. Unlike other Soulsborne, Ring, Core titles, I strongly believe Sekiro's gameplay is the perfected version of that tried and true formula. Gone is boring beta male rolling. Hello to the new Sigma male parrying system, chock full of heart-racing action sequences, gorgeous spark effects, and frankly the most satisfying sound in gaming. No, not that one. That's much better. Anyways, hey, I'm Ryan, and I'm making a top-down action samurai game, inspired by Samurai Champloo and a few of my favorite games. I'm aiming to make a stylish game reminiscent of Samurai Champloo's Sidetracked, but with more of a focus on skill and gameplay-oriented combat. And speaking of, Sekiro's frenetic combat system sounds pretty similar to the vision I have for my game, with an emphasis on timing, parrying, and staggering. Those three ings are the building blocks that make fighting in Sekiro so much fun. And here's the thing, guess what, I'm really lazy, like astonishingly so. I'm also a firm believer in thieving, stealing, pillaging, really anything in that ballpark. So I'm just gonna, take it, well, okay, kind of. The vision I have for my game's combat system is essentially a Sekiro light. I want to capture that same rhythmic synergy, but kind of simplify the posture and stagger system so it's a little more accessible. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Before we even think about parrying and flashy gameplay and, everything else, I've got to get health, damage, and attacking implemented. So let me work on that, and once I'm done, we'll reconvene and talk about it. See you in a bit. And we're back. The player can now lock onto enemies, which already makes a huge difference in combat's polish and the overall feel. Locking on is paired with a nifty little white outline effect, singling out which enemy is locked onto. In a little more interesting news though, enemies and the player now take and dish out damage, with hit reactions and a bit of knockback to boot. This yellow samurai, our resident punching bag, is going to demonstrate. I'm happy with the look of this so far, and visually I think our little enemy guy responds to pain quite nicely. On the other side of the coin, when the player takes damage, the hit is emphasized with a bloody screen and a nice little sound effect. The player also has a few moments of invincibility after getting hit, unlike the enemy, who can be brutally comboed to death. Just like enemies, the player also has the ability to block any incoming attacks. I haven't quite decided what I want to happen after a standard block, whether the player takes a little bit of damage, or maybe your guard breaks after enough hits. I'm not really sure, that thought is still a work in progress. But now that all that boring damage stuff is out of the way, let's really get down to the meat and potatoes of this video. Okay, so pay attention, this part's important. There are three types of attacks that enemies can perform so far: stagger, string, and heavy. These attacks are paired with a corresponding image to show the player what type of attack is incoming. First of the bunch is stagger, the single parryable attack. So yeah, first let's get into the parry implementation. In order to be perfected, the parry mechanic requires supreme mental focus, and preferably a body coursing with G Fuel, if I'm being honest. It's gotta be timed right before impact in order to land properly. And after a successful parry, the enemy staggers, leaving an opening for the player to capitalize. All pretty standard Souls-like stuff. All the effects are still a work in progress, they're not nearly as cool as Sekiro yet, but I think I'm off to a pretty good start. Now, the second type of attack is a little more interesting. I've been referring to it as a string attack. Basically, it's a series of attacks where each single one must be parried. If the player parries every attack in the series, then the enemy is staggered after the final attack. If the player doesn't parry every attack, then the enemy doesn't stagger. That simple. This way, the player is rewarded for quick reflexes and also memorizing attacks. String attacks are signified with a goldish yellow glow around the enemy, and then later with a purple tint and image if all the attacks have been parried. I realize that this could end up a little unfair to everyone that's colorblind out there, so yeah, I'll have to work around that. No idea how, but I'll think of something. But back to string attacks, I want to capture that same sensation that Sekiro offers, where combat is almost reminiscent of a dance. Right now, it feels pretty fluid to parry a string of attacks while at the same time dealing with another enemy. On another note, a subtle aspect that I think really enhances the dance-like feel of combat is actually the ability to animation cancel on the fly. Attacks can be cancelled into blocks into dashes, etc. Everything can be cancelled. This keeps combat feeling fluid and dynamic. In other news, I haven't gotten the sound effects to feel quite right just yet, but it's something I'm looking to improve, especially since that parry sound in Sekiro is really just the cherry on top. Now all this is well and good, and I think the parry is at a decent point for the time being, but the combat still feels a little one-note. Dare I say even a tad boring. The player can basically stand still and parry every single attack that is thrown at them, which doesn't really make for the most engaging gameplay. So then how do we remedy that? Well, one thing comes to mind. Let's steal some more from the greatest combat system in games. In Sekiro, dashing is utilized as a secondary option to blocking, especially when dealing with special attacks that are unblockable. I like this a lot. Dashing keeps the player always moving and thinking about both forms of attacks. Distance matters now too, as does the type of move that the player responds with. Oh, and speaking of distance, dashing can also be used to quickly close it. This allows for more avenues for the player to choose, and in my experience, that's rarely a bad thing. So, let's steal all that and implement the same idea into this game too. Okay, here's what I have so far for the dash. I like how it currently feels in combat, but I've had some trouble thinking up and implementing effects that complement it nicely. I don't think it sucks or anything like that, I'm somewhat satisfied with the lightning effects, but I do still think it's missing something, so let me know what you think. But with that aside, here's the dash in action against a heavy enemy. This guy, appropriately titled Heavy Enemy 01, has a bag full of unblockable attacks, which forces the player to dodge instead of parry. As you can see, when an unblockable attack is incoming, the enemy lights up red, since red is the big bad scary color and all that. And also the skull kind of just drives that point home, I think. Yeah, so that wraps up the 3 melee attacks that I've implemented so far. But hold your horses, because I'm going to throw in a little bonus enemy, just for you, free of charge. A gun-wielding, shifty little guy. And yeah, there are guns in this field, Japan, because this is a game, and guns are fun in games. And speaking of things that make playing games so much more fun, the player can parry bullets now, which sends them right back at the sender. Outside of this guy's ranged attack, Ranged Enemy 01 can melee attack in short-range situations, and also perform a quick dodge if the player gets too close. A man of many talents. Each of these enemies are fun alone, but mixing and matching them together makes for a kinetic, pretty challenging base to a combat system that I'll continue to work at and perfect. It has its issues, but honestly, I'm ecstatic about the progress I've made so far, and I'm really excited to spice up the combat effects, which is what I plan to do in the next devlog. The video timeline is a little unclear at the moment. My plan is a video every other month or so, that way I have time to work, tinker on the game, and dedicate some free time to my love life. Make sure to subscribe and throw a wishlist my way if you're interested in the game, or really if you just feel bad for me, that totally works too. Steam page link is in the description. See ya!